Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror and detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of Wendigo horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story, possible Wendigo encounter. Hey everyone, not sure if this is the right place to post this, but I'm definitely spooked. Also my very first Reddit post, so sorry if it's a little jumbled. So today my friend, let's call her Ray, and I were in my car at night. Windows rolled down and screaming our heads off to loud music. We were feeling absolutely happy, laughing and having a great time overall while driving around the rich neighborhoods looking at huge mansions. Now, here comes what spooked us majorly. We start getting a little put off because of how dark this road was. Plus we were going into the middle of a forested area, and everything around us was getting darker and darker. I had to turn on the brights on my car. Now, we still didn't say anything to each other seriously, only joking about being a little nervous and getting weird vibes. I make the mistake of turning down a forked road, and immediately we feel sick to our stomachs, both at the same time. I just looked at her, and we both started saying about how something is not right. It was such an urgent feeling of terror, dread, knowing something terrible was going to happen if we stopped the car. We felt like we had to roll the windows up because we wanted to be safer. Once we finally sped back around and started leaving, I felt an intense feeling of something watching us, and I just could not make myself turn to look to my side into the forest or behind us. The second we got off that road, it felt like a weight came off our shoulders, again at the same time. I've never felt this terrified before, with such a huge pit in my stomach and sense of dread. What was that? Seriously, I have no idea what happened or why we started feeling that way suddenly. I'm so scared, even just thinking about it gives me goosebumps all over. Has anyone else experienced something like this? Or do you know what it might have been? Edit. Sorry for my lack of education on what Wendigos or other creatures of that sort actually are. I heard from people around me that that's the feeling you get when they are around you, but I might be totally wrong. Something was definitely up though, whatever it was. Second story, the forest where the deer cry blood. I had been a hunter for most of my life leading up to this incident. The smell of the warm air and the beauty of nature always had me at ease. I never felt scared alone at night because I have seen everything there is to be scared of. I have seen bears the size of a small car and animals so vicious they would kill anything that moved. The one thing I was never scared of was deer. I had heard the tales of the skinwalker, the Wendigo, and pretty much anything in between. My uncle was an expert in tracking and hunting. We always went on trips together and would always come back with a fresh kill. He had something about him. It was a rule. I remember it so vividly because it was weird. He never wanted to go hunting in winter. I never asked why. I don't know, but something about it always had me on edge. One day it was winter, and I was about to go deer hunting when my uncle stopped at my front door. When he came in, he saw my packed supplies and my rifle and knew I was about to go hunting. He immediately burst into a wrath of anger as he dragged me to a wall and got into my face. "What the fuck do you think you're doing?" His spit went all over my face as he looked crazy. He looked primal, as if he was fearful of something that he did not want to share. It's the same face you would expect a child to make if they were dumped in the middle of nowhere. The same face of fear you see in people who have PTSD. I calmly brushed him off and got to the door saying I was going hunting. I was not about to fight with my uncle and ruin this trip, as I hadn't gone hunting for close to a month. When you hunt, you get adjusted to it, and when you go on breaks, you actually miss it. As I got into my truck, my uncle peered at me out the window. He was there to take care of my house, but before I reversed, he left with the door open. My uncle is prone to outbursts. As I should mention, He's only ever done it a few times, and it's always in a situation where the reaction suits it. Not this one, however. What was so bad about hunting in the winter? The spot I had planned was an isolated one. It was a very heavily forested area which I had not been to before. I obviously had mapped the area out and brought essential survival tools in case the worst came. But I never thought I would have to use it after all those years out in the forest. When I arrived, the crisp, cold air immediately saturated me in discomfort. I quickly got another layer of clothes on before I started to walk to where I would set up camp for the night. The clearing I had chosen was a pretty tight one. There was a big tree in the center that stood tall above the rest. It was called the forest star, which suited it. Around the clearing, the forest was extremely dense. Almost no sun shone through the top. There was a small hunting tower north of the entrance of the clearing, so it was a direct walk from camp. As I walked ahead, I noticed something. There were small droplets of blood littering the ground. My first thought was that it must have been an injured animal or something like that, but the droplets were small and almost even. I shook the thought out of my head and made it to my setup, and I started to pin my tent. When I was done, I checked my watch. It was around 5:30 p.m. I had around 2 hours for hunting before it was pitch black, and so I made it to the tower. When I undid my rifle from its case, I heard scampering. Shaking it off, I took position and waited. As I stood there, time almost slowed down. I was in a precise focus and was ready for anything. I wasn't ready for what I saw. Out came 2 small bucks that seemed injured. There were small droplets of blood coming from their eyes. As I focused, and I saw that it wasn't dried blood. It was fresh, and it was oozing from their eyes. I was shocked. I had never seen anything like it. Multiple scenarios ran through my head. I was thinking, had a hunter shot both of them in the eyes and managed to not kill them? But each scenario seemed more unlikely than the last. I took aim at the closest one and shot it. It stood there for a second, just not moving. Then they trotted off as if nothing had happened. Blood was running from the wound, so I had obviously hit it, but it didn't seem scared nor fazed. I decided that was enough and sort of jogged to my site. I was freaked out and decided that I'd cook dinner and go to bed early. When I scampered around my pack, I pulled out a tin of beans. I grabbed a pot and started a fire and began cooking them. As I cracked open a beer, the familiar sound of a branch snapping sounded off next to me. I thought it was probably just a small deer, and I brushed it off as I sat and relaxed. I was thinking about the deer, and I started to chalk it up to the fact I must not have hit deep and the deer were shocked. When I finished eating, I went to bed. I was shivering in the night cold, and I could feel my body shaking uncontrollably. As I dozed off after a brutal 2 hours of cold, I heard another snap. This time, however, it was a lot louder, like a bear. I immediately grabbed my rifle and went out of my tent. My fire burned low, and in the distance, I saw 2 red lights. I walked towards it when my mind started to race. Something felt wrong. As I closed the distance, my gut was literally twisted. My mind was anxious, and I felt like I was about to break down. Then I realized what was wrong. Those weren't lights. They were 2 big, beady, solid red eyes. There were no pupils. They were just orbs hovering. When I realized, I stood frozen. I thought it was a big cat, but what emerged was so much worse. Its fur was black, darker than the night around us. Its antlers grew twisted and uneven. But the worst part? It was crying blood. Deep red droplets were pelting down its unnatural eyes. I couldn't make a sound. I was frozen in fear. Then it started to make sounds. The sounds of a baby crying. It was horrible. The sounds of unnatural wails filled the cold air, making it worse. My body felt crumpled, and so I finally broke out into a sprint. When I looked back, it stood there. It wasn't even breathing. But the sounds of that baby crying weren't fading. It was like a speaker was attached to my ear. When I made it back to camp, I rushed to pack my stuff. In a hurry, I ran, leaving the tent behind, and I rushed to my truck. As I fumbled with the keys, I saw that something was walking slowly towards me. That's when the whispering started. Terrible faint voices echoed throughout the forest as my mind started to close. I felt my cerebral melting as anything I tried to do would not happen. It was like sleep paralysis. As I stood there, I found the strength to finally open the door and get in my car. I slammed the door shut, and that thing was right at the window. I started to sob as I jammed the keys in the ignition. My mind felt fried as I swerved out of there. I didn't care if I hit anything. I just wanted to be away from that thing. Before I could properly back out, it stood up on its legs, and it repeated a voice I recognized. You do not escape thee. The forests are
Mine.
It was my grandpa's voice. He died when I was 6, and I never knew any of the details. The thing then made a howl, a terrible shrieking howl that hurt my entire body. As it did so, I heard scampering as more of those things came out. They had blood running from their eyes as well. The baby cries started again, and that's when I finally drove out of that fucking place. When I raced home, I immediately barged into the door. My shoulder ached, but I didn't care. I shoved my door and locked it and ran into my kitchen. That's when I saw my uncle sitting at the table enjoying a small glass of scotch. So, you saw what I did, didn't you, Anthony? I couldn't form words. I was so shocked. My uncle came up to me and said, "What you saw out there is my rule I abide by. There are things in those forests in winter that are so horrible even the most seasoned can't handle it. I saw it when I was a boy, and since then I don't hunt during winter." I finally mustered a sentence. Was it? He took a small sip before sitting me down. "You saw something called Urbarak. It is an ancient being that dwells in the forests during these winters. Hunters who see it usually never are the same again, but some never come home. I was lucky." My uncle sort of sniffled as he told me about his encounter with Urbarak. "When I was 23, my father and I went out into the woods on a very cold winter to hunt. Our family was struggling, so we didn't have much food. When we were hunting, my father called out to me, but before I could even get to him, I heard him yell out before he fell silent. I never saw him again, but what stood there was worse than the loss of my own. A deer with red eyes, black fur, and twisted antlers stood there. Blood was running from its eyes. Then it started to cry like a baby." My uncle broke down and had to take a second before continuing. I comforted him as I was teary-eyed. It ran after me, Anthony, on 2 legs. It was like a human, and I rushed to get away from it. I managed to get myself." He rolled up his sleeve to reveal a terrible red scar that ran across the entire underside of his arm. "It was trying to feast on me. It knew I feared it. But eventually I managed to lose it." He finally finished his scotch before continuing. "I was stuck in those forests for 3 days fighting to survive. I heard its cries and whispers all around as I tried to make it out. I finally arrived at a road and was taken in by the police. No trace was found of my father except for one thing. They found blood at the scene and tested it. It was my father's. What was strange about it? It was mixed with his tears." My uncle finally stood up. "Fear it, for it knows who you are." Those were his last words. He left my house, and the police found him wrapped up in a noose 2 days later. It broke me. My hunting buddy and best friend was gone. There was one detail about his suicide that was never resolved. He had droplets of blood coming from his eyes. The coroner's inspection said it was an aneurysm, but I'm not so sure that is the truth. I am 50 now, and I haven't been hunting in 2 decades. I can't even go into the forests anymore. I'm thinking about going back and seeing what Urbarak is. Maybe I can kill him. Beware Urbarak, for he lurks in the cold. Third story. There's a stranger in my house. There's something off about him. It was the worst blizzard since 1975 here in Wisconsin. They are calling it the storm of the century. The blizzards here are brutal. A few years ago, there was one so bad that traffic came to a dead stop. After being on that frozen highway all night, I try to hunker down when there's a blizzard. Just me and my German Shepherd, Max. We've mostly been watching movies to pass the time. Then suddenly, right in the middle of watching The Godfather, I heard a knock at my door. Max went ballistic. This was an unusual reaction from him. It startled me. My house is pretty secluded off a remote highway, so I don't get many visitors, even in good weather, leaving me to wonder who's out at 10 p.m. in this weather. I grabbed my pistol and tucked it in my waistband before heading to the door. "Who's out there?" I asked. After a brief moment of silence, I got a reply. "Hey there, my name's Carl. My truck slid off the highway a couple miles back. I came out here looking for shelter. Do you mind if I stay here?" I watched Carl through the peephole before responding. I couldn't tell what, but something about him just seemed off. Something wasn't quite right about him. I brushed it off. I figured I'd probably look a little odd after walking a couple miles through a tundra. "All right, get in here, Carl," I said, opening the door for him. The wind outside was howling, making it tough to shut the door behind him. Max really went postal at Carl when he entered. Max was usually a little weary of strangers, but once I'd invite them in, he would settle down. Except that didn't happen this time. I tried to calm him down, but I couldn't. I decided it would be best put him in the bedroom for a while. When I came back out, Carl was taking his snow-covered coat off. "You got real lucky, Carl. There's a lot of less trusting folk around here. Sorry about the dog. He's not usually like that." "Thanks," Carl said, shivering. "Hey, what are you doing out driving around in the second day of this storm? You should have stayed home. Real dangerous to be going out for anything in weather like this." "My power went out. I was trying to make it to my brother's house, but it probably wasn't my best idea." He seemed to be telling the truth, as far as I could tell, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something off about this guy. Max was still going crazy in the other room. It was starting to concern me. "All right, do you want some coffee to warm you up?" I asked. He nodded his head in response. When I turned around to pour him a cup, all the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I knew there was something off with this guy, but I couldn't tell what. "I'm just being paranoid," I tried to reassure myself as I handed him the mug. I hit play on the movie, and it started playing again in the background. As Carl held the warm mug in his hands, I watched him intently. My phone vibrated. It was an emergency alert that read, "Warning, do not let any strangers into your house. Murderer out pretending to seek refuge from storm." I looked back up to Carl. He sat there just looking at his mug. I started to walk to the other room. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yeah, I just gotta grab something real quick." I opened the door to the bedroom where Max was and grabbed my shotgun. Max followed me back to the kitchen, barking as we approached Carl. I racked the shotgun, loading a slug into the chamber. "Hands up and turn around slowly," I ordered. He sat there for a moment before moving. He stood up and turned around, looking me in the eye. "What's this all about?" he asked innocently. "It's time for you to leave." "Please no. I'll freeze. I'm sorry, but you need to leave. Now." It was in that moment Carl smiled. That's when I realized what was off about him. His mouth had too many teeth. Way too many teeth. They were sharp and jagged. Then he charged at me. He was quick. Almost too quick. I just barely had time to pull the trigger before he reached me. The shot knocked him to the floor and left a large hole in his chest, but no blood came out. He looked back up at me and grinned even wider now as he tried to get up. I fired again, leaving a hole in his skull, but it was clear to me that the shotgun wasn't going to stop this guy for long. I ran to the door, slid on my boots, and ran. Max followed close behind. As I hopped on my snowmobile, he hopped onto my sled in the back. We took off. I zipped through the woods. The snow was deep and I was getting pelted in the face by snow and twigs. We didn't make it too far before I hit something and lost control. I flew through the air and into a tree. I woke up to Max trying to drag me by my coat. I struggled to get up. My head was spinning and I was running off sheer adrenaline. I made it to my feet and I could hear twigs snapping in the distance behind me. Max and I took off running through the woods. It was difficult with well over a foot of snow on the ground. My lungs burned and my legs felt like jello, but we pressed on, unsure of how close that thing was. After what felt like hours, we came to a clearing. I could see a light in the distance. It was a house. I felt a sense of relief as we ran towards it. When we got to the house, I pounded on the door. "Please help," I yelled out. After a few long moments, the door opened. Suddenly, there was a gun in my face. Max started growling. "Quiet," I told him, and he settled down. I pleaded with the man in the doorway. "Please help me. I let that thing into my house. I let it into my house. It's not human." The man didn't lower his gun before responding. "I heard about you on the news. Get out of here before I shoot you." "No, please. You don't understand. I let him in my house. He almost got me. Go now and take your friend back there with you." I turned around to see that thing approaching. "No, no, no, no. That's that thing that's killing people. Watch this." I pull my pistol out of my waistband and fire 3 shots into its chest. It keeps approaching, unfazed with a wicked grin on its face. "You see that? That thing's not human. Please help me." I pleaded with him. "All right, get in here. Quick." He replied quickly. I looked out the door as Max entered behind me to see it getting even closer. What do we do? What do we do? Well, shooting it doesn't seem to do much to it. Maybe it's like a Wendigo, and we need to burn it. He starts grabbing various bottles of liquor from a cabinet and starts pouring them on the floor in a circle around his living room. We'll lure the bastard into the circle, and once he's in, we'll light him up like a Christmas tree. Suddenly, the door was ripped from its hinges. We started shooting as it approached with a grotesque smile on its face. The moment it entered the circle, I grabbed a burning log from the fireplace. The creature's smile faded quickly as it grimaced. But it was too late for the creature as I threw the burning log on the ground in front of it, setting it ablaze. It made a horrible, ear-piercing screech as it was engulfed in flames. The flames quickly spread, setting the house ablaze. We ran outside to escape the flames. We both collapsed into the snow, coughing from the smoke. "Sorry about your house," I said to the man. "It's all right. I have insurance," he chuckled back. In that moment, I felt a deep sense of relief that was quickly interrupted by a man who came out of the forest and said, "A house fire in a blizzard now, that's just bad luck. Any chance you two have seen my brother Carl?" He smiled as he approached, revealing a mouth full of sharp, jagged teeth. 4th story. The Great Cryptid Hunt. My brother is missing. He has been gone for the better part of 2 years. This wouldn't be unusual for Gary, though. We grew up together, separated by only a few years. He was always the adventurous one, courageous, brave, and intelligent, the worst combination for an older brother. Everybody loved and admired him, and I lived in his shadow. Most people would be resentful, but Gary was a character who raised those around him. I always knew he would end up making a positive difference in the world. When he told me he was going to be away for a few months the summer of my senior year, I wasn't surprised. He had been involved with a statewide operation which led to the seizure of a large amount of narcotics. He was an investigative journalist and had spent months working from the inside to build a case for the local police. The next big case was another year undercover, working to tear down an arms dealer. The group were supplying and fueling gang wars, profiting from the lives of men killed by the weapons he put in their hands. He told me some details over drinks one night over the holidays. He didn't say much until late into the night. He told me how involved he needed to be to get into a position to know the head of the operation. Things he didn't like to reminisce on for too long. It was the same night that he told me about his next assignment. He was working on bringing down a worldwide organization who arranged big game hunting trips for seedy individuals. I met him a couple of months later, and he told me he was leaving the country to meet up with the group. That was the last I heard from him until today. I received an email this morning from an unknown sender. The subject title said, "For the attention of the big fella." I normally would delete these on receipt, but the title caught my attention. Gary had always called me the big fella since I passed him in height at 15. I am about an inch taller than him and wouldn't be considered the big fella by any means. The email contained a text file and journal detailing his time spent with the group. The text file just said the following: "I don't think I'm going to make it back from this one, big fella. The latter is why I have reached out to you. I fear something terrible has happened. I am trying to track down his location from any clues hidden in these files. Unfortunately, I have to piece together the story from fragmented documents. I'm hoping one of you may be able to help locate him." May 5th, 2022. Last week I received the notification to meet in a small town in North Dakota. It was addressed to Mr. Jonathan Marley, the alias in which I have been communicating under. The letter was stamped with a golden view at the head of the page. There was a list of essentials such as camping equipment, warm clothing, and hunting equipment. Food would be provided on site before departure. There was a highlighted asterisk beside hunting equipment. It said if bringing your own weaponry, rifle and sidearm must be compatible with .308 and 9mm caliber respectively. Weapons will be provided on departure if requirements cannot be met. The request felt strange to me, but I knew this group was very exclusive in admission and presumed it was part of their procedures to remain anonymous. The final part of the note stated the next part of the trip would be confirmed on the day. Our meeting point is situated on the outskirts of a forest. The town seems abandoned other than the people from the Venators, Latin for the hunters. A mix of men and women equipped in military-grade gear, quite heavy duty for a simple hunting expedition. The main spokesperson for the Venators was a broad man called Crane. He wore a dusty black cowboy hat pulled down to his eyes. His right cheek had 3 prominent scars running towards his top lip. I'd like to thank you all for joining us on the first great cryptid hunt. This adventure will bring us into contact with the most prestigious prey known to man. I wasn't sure what he meant by cryptid, but the other 10 people who seemed to be joining the party didn't look too confused by this. I'd just like to remind you all that this hunt is partaken at your own risk. I'm presuming you have the necessary precautions in place if something were to go wrong. A slight murmur of agreement from the crowd allowed Crane to continue. This is your last chance to pull out. Once I name our first intended target, there is no going back. Please return to your vehicle and leave if you have any doubt about your commitment. He eyed the group intensely, waiting for our response. When no one backed away, he smiled. With that, we are bound to the hunt. He raised a fist in triumph. Go collect your ammunition from the table to your left. Silver bullets are the only thing that can take down a Wendigo. The group set out as the sun reached its peak. Crane, the only member of the Venators. The others were to hold down base camp and come to our aid if the need arose. They also were arranging transport for the next trip to Ireland. for members of the gang split off to the right. A hushed but frantic discussion barely audible. Marco, the son of an Italian superyacht distributor, was accompanied by his partner Lola and two friends, Antonio and Michael, all of whom were reassuring Lola that this trip was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see the magical creatures walk among us. I was unsure how anyone would describe a Wendigo as magical from the stories you would hear on the internet. My expectations for this hunt have reduced dramatically. The thoughts of uncovering a huge illegal hunting enterprise have tethered out as I realized we will be hunting a planted elk with a sound box attached. It's hard to comprehend how the Venators have managed to pull the wool over the eyes of so many wealthy and prominent figures. For the sake of my cover, I know I will need to play my role in this trip, but I'm hopeful that I may depart before the next destination. Where is the next leg of the trip, by the way? I called out to Crane, who led the party as we broke through the tree line. Ah yes, I knew I was forgetting something. He turned to address us. The next target is a mythical siren who calls out to announce the passing of loved ones. A banshee? Joshua questioned in a thick Texan accent. He too adorned a cowboy hat, but his was polished and new. You got it in one, Mr. Williams. Crane clapped his hands enthusiastically. You hear that, Junior? We're heading to Ireland. Joshua clapped his son on the back as the two discussed the terrain they may have to deal with while hunting a banshee. Joshua Jr., or J.J. as he was known, was the spitting image of his father, albeit about half his size. J.J. needed every bit of his belt loop to keep his trousers above his ankles. As night fell, we made our camp in a clearing that Crane had spotted. We'll take turns on duty tomorrow night, if it takes that long. Tonight, I'll let you get some rest. No need to be the hero, Crane. Each one of us is experienced enough to keep a fire going. Crane dismissed the remark with some reassuring words on how he was well rested and would enjoy the tasks. That seemed to settle Joshua, as he felt there was no questioning of his abilities. I took out my notepad to scribble down my thoughts on the day so far. I was running through ideas of how the Venators were concocting this fraudulent trip when Jay approached. Are you working on your checklist? He asked as he sat down beside me. No, just journaling the day. I like to get my thoughts down while they're still fresh. My response didn't seem to register with J.J. Me and Pops have most things checked off already. Lions, elephants, cheetahs, even a grizzly or two. J.J. seemed to be reminiscing as he asked, have you ever encountered anything of this kind before? Not even in the slightest. It was an honest response. I'm aware of how much it cost to get involved with the Venators, and J.J. and his father had paid double. I didn't want to be the one to break the news that what we were searching for was no more than a dud. We saw something like this on our farm a couple of years back. Kept terrorizing our cattle. Tore some of them to pieces, so it did. He looked over towards his father. Pops didn't know what to do. He shot the son of a bitch damn near 10 times. It just kept coming back. Ended up having to call Mr. Bolton. He gestured to another member of our group who sat alone cleaning his rifle. Caleb Bolton was a dark-skinned man with cat-like eyes. He had his head shaved to the skin. A tree trunk-like neck was in proportion to the rest of his body. Mr. Bolton came late one night and set off into the darkness. The next morning he came back covered in blood and deep gashes. He walked right up to Pa and said, "It's been dealt with," and just walked right off. Pop slipped him an envelope worth more than all the cows on the farm. He went off into the distance, leaving a trail of blood in his wake. I looked over Caleb, wondering what brought a man like him here, only to notice he was staring right back. The night wore on with nothing to report. We settled in and went to sleep as Crane looked out into the forest. I woke up late into the night as a sharp stick I missed nearly punctured my lung as I rolled over. I could see Crane sitting with his back to a tree, face illuminated by the glow of his cigarette. "Can't sleep, Mr. Marley?" Crane asked as he fished another cigarette out of his pack and handed it to me. "You can call me Jonathan," I said as I lit the cigarette. I sat down beside him looking out over the camp. "Will the fire not attract the Wendigo?" I asked, gesturing to the crackling blaze in the center of the sleeping bags. "No need to worry about that, Jonathan." Crane tipped the ashes onto a stone beside him and pointed across the camp into a dense area of trees. "He's been following us since we got here." Crane's words stayed with me as I lay awake. There was a small part of me that was truly scared. The part that was largely present as a child when the darkness held shadows of figures you couldn't comprehend. His demeanor would convince most that we truly were dealing with a creature of the supernatural. I left his side feeling as if we were the ones being hunted. Full of mixed emotions, I tossed and turned for what seemed like hours. My skepticism battling hard against the situation I had found myself in. The forest added to my unease. Branches rustled as a slight breeze blew through the camp. The debate playing out in my mind was silenced by a strangled scream that echoed through the encampment. "Where's Lucas?" Ellie asked as she ripped out of her sleeping bag, grabbing her husband Levi by the shoulders. Levi gathered up his rifle and started towards the location of the uproar, calling out for his son. Caleb and Crane are already ahead of him. I followed after bringing the handgun I had under my pillow. Caleb and Crane split off in separate directions, directing each other through pointing and gestures. They encircled an area 15 feet from where I stood. Crane surveyed the area thoroughly as Caleb scanned the trees. "Something was here all right, but I don't think it was your son." Crane looked at Levi, his face full of concern. That sense of dread intensified. Marco and Antonio came rushing towards us, the faces slick with sweat. "Lucas is okay. He was just going to the toilet," Marco said, panting. "He came back not long after you left. We weren't sure what to do, so we came to get you," Antonio said, hunching over from the extension. Levi let out a sigh of relief as he made his way over to thank the guys for bringing the good news. I turned to Crane to ask him what he thought could have made the noise, but the color had drained from his face. "We have to get back now, Da." Crane pushed past us at full sprint, heading in the direction of camp. "It seems we have been fooled," Caleb said, much more calmly than the situation deserved. We raced through the trees, receiving nicks and cuts as we ran without hesitation. I was pulling away from the main group, just keeping pace with Crane and Caleb, my arms pumping like pistons working to their max. The two in front didn't seem to be putting much effort in their stride, yet they ate up the ground like a marathon runner on his first mile. They were discussing what they might find on our return, but I was too focused on filling my lungs with deep breaths to hear what they were saying. They burst into camp, frightening the 4 remaining members who looked perfectly fine sitting around the fireplace. "Jesus Christ, Crane, you frightened me half to death." Michael was gripping his rifle tightly as the others shrank in behind him. Levi was next to break the clearing, overjoyed to see his family safe and well. Ellie went over to greet him. As she stretched out her arm to take his hand in hers, Lucas let out a cry of panic. Her arm never made it far enough to embrace her husband. The Wendigo burst out from the shadows, grabbing Ellie by the arm and tearing it off, and he flung her down on the moss-covered floor. She bounced with the force, but managed to remain conscious as the beast reared his fangs in her face. The sight of the creature made my blood turn to ice. It was humanoid in some respects, although its limbs were elongated beyond belief. Its ribs protruded its sides, stretching its pale skin to bursting point. Blood ran down its face and chest as it tore a chunk from the arm in which it held. It seemed to stare into my soul as I froze in place, awaiting certain death. Michael aimed at the monstrous figure, but pulled his shot. The bullet struck Ellie in the temple. On reflection, I believe it to be an act of mercy from whatever God looks down upon us. The Wendigo screamed in anger and flung Ellie's body towards us. It crashed into Lucas, knocking him back several feet, his mother's blood covering him in a shower of crimson. My stomach emptied itself of any contents left from dinner. The Wendigo stomped towards us, true evil glistening in the moonlight. Levi managed to pull himself from his daze once he noticed the creature heading towards his son. He looked at his wife's corpse and pure rage boiled over. He tackles the Wendigo with all his might, knocking the beast back into the fire. It tripped over as its right foot caught ablaze. Levi fell on top of it and unloaded the clip of his pistol into the creature's chest. For every bullet he fired, the Wendigo tore off a strip of flesh. His chest was opened first, a mist of red spraying into the night sky. His face was the next to go. Teeth were launched 10 feet in all directions. Levi kept firing through this brutal assault. As the hammer clicked empty, not much remained to identify Levi. His rage-fueled attack cost him his life. The Wendigo pushed the remains of Levi to the side and clambered to its feet. The silver bullets lodged into his chest were bringing this monster closer to its final breath. "Steady now," Crane called out as he raised his sights. "On my mark." Lucas roared as he ran towards the Wendigo. He brandished a blade from its sheath with murderous intentions. I tried to grab him as he raised the blade for the killing blow. I could see what looked like a grin on the face of the Wendigo through the large, gaping hole of Lucas's chest. The Wendigo had punched through, tearing his heart out in one swift motion. "For fuck's sake," Crane said in disbelief. "Fire!" The forest erupted in a cacophony of gunfire as bits of Wendigo were torn apart. It crumpled to the ground, relishing in the delight to gain one more soul before it fell. Crane dropped his rifle and walked back to his tree where his cigarettes once were. He picked up the tattered box which had been destroyed in the melee. I offered him one of mine as we sat by the tree, soaked in the blood of many. "And then there was 7, he said as he ignited his match on the stricker box. Fifth story. The Wendigo learned to tell time on Thanksgiving. I know what you're thinking. A mythical spirit being able to tell time isn't necessarily a bad thing. I'm here to tell you it's necessarily a bad thing. A horrible thing, in fact. Without the ability to tell time, the Wendigo would strike randomly, out of nowhere, maybe going decades or centuries without attacking. But maybe I'm being too naive. Maybe the Wendigo has made me naive, cloaking its murders in various, everyday seeming tragedies. I live out in the country, miles away from the excitement of city life, of neon sin shrouded in innocent novelty. Somehow, though, the chaos of city life found me. My father told me as long as you stay in the house you've lived in all your life, nothing could harm you. Like a fool, I believed him. I followed in my father's footsteps, and it led to my ruin. A kindly neighbor, Joe, moved in next door, although next door is a bit misleading since acres separate humans from each other out here. He was younger, spry, and full of beans. He had a wife, a quiet woman named Jennifer, and one child, barely 5 months old. Despite being at heart a good-natured fellow, he seemed stressed out because the child, Desmond, kept slipping from one illness to the next. One day things seemed especially bad, around Thanksgiving time if I recall. The leaves had all but been sucked off the trees, and it had been raining all day. I didn't have a good feeling about that day. Something seemed off, a little too dismal. I had been thinking bad thoughts ever since the sun woke me up. The objective observer would tell you that this was because my wife expired a few months before, and that I still hadn't come out the other side yet, you know? But I know. The Wendigo, well, let's put it this way. When the Wendigo wants you to know he's coming, he'll give you clues the day before, sometimes the week before. Anyway, I told Joe about the Wendigo, about how if you knew what you were doing, you could make the spirit give your child, or anyone, a more stable flame of life if it was sputtering for some reason. He looked at me like I was crazy or something. I knew I wasn't. Eventually, he caught on, realizing a man with such sure convictions couldn't be wrong. I gave Joe the scroll I used to save my wife from the brink so many years ago. I told him the fine print was something worth reading, that if you performed the ritual in a wrong way, the Wendigo would be as clear-minded about mortal affair as you or me, be able to tell time. Insert himself into the flow of our reality without missing a beat. Well, I won't go into too much detail about what happened, or how it happened. Joe performed the ritual wrong, as I knew he most likely would. But I just couldn't let a kid die, you know? I went to Joe's house for Thanksgiving. He knew I was a lonely old man who had just lost his wife. Usually, I wasn't one for a pity invite, but I figured I didn't want to spend the hours ticking off the seconds in my head and waiting for the axe to fall. Better to keep yourself busy. I'll never be able to get that grisly scene out of my head as long as I live. Joe's body was spread out on the coffee table, his face looking miserable and defeated. Jennifer's corpse rested in the fireplace. The lights had been turned off except for a single dim bulb hanging from the kitchen ceiling. Desmond sat at the kitchen table, gnawing on his dad's fingers. He stared at me curiously, like a cat often stares at its master when eating its meal. "Oh, why did you do it, Joe? You gave the scroll to an idiot." A man so addled at the prospect of losing his son, of being outside the pleasant rhythm of society, that he'd do just about anything in order to make sure his son stayed alive, Desmond said. His eyes were bleeding sockets, and it occurred to me that was how my dad said the Wendigo entered a human body, through the eyes, making them explode. "Would you like a finger? Maybe a thigh? It is Thanksgiving after all." Desmond gave me a wicked smile. A smile no child of 5 months should be capable of. "Now you just stay right there. Don't come any closer," I said in a firm voice. Joe just had to read the scroll in front of his wall clock. So desperate to save his son he couldn't read the fine print, Desmond went on. Surprisingly, Desmond didn't try to kill me that day. He told me my time was coming, and that I'd know when my curtain would flow across the dusty stage of my life when he wanted me to know. Then he got up, told me not to disturb his great feast because he would be back to devour them in their entirety. So many months have passed since then. The Wendigo devoured his victims, and it was like they never existed at all. Now I'm staring at my own wall clock, thinking every day the axe might fall. The Wendigo can tell time now, and he can confer with the Reaper, know the date and time of my death, and say, "I know this old man should die via electrocution, but let me lend a helping hand." 6th story. I think I may have seen a Wendigo. So this is very confusing, but bear with me. I was in my house with tea and a book. I have a large window seat on the second floor, and I was chilling right there. I have a small 2-story cabin in the woods. A long driveway, about a half-mile, leads down to the main road, not a highway, mind you. I enjoy taking hikes, hunting, fishing, and just enjoying nature in general. I was looking out into the forest to see if I could find any cool birds when I heard a noise. A rustle in the bushes brought my attention toward my neighbor's cattle pen. My neighbor's house can only be accessed by the same long road, and they have a farm with 3 cattle, 2 cows and a bull, 12 chickens, and 2 pigs. A large barn sits in the middle of all the pens. The bush rustled again, thinking it was a bear. I was worried it would take one of the pigs and drag them into the woods. This has happened once already, sadly. I grabbed my old hunting rifle. I was going to attempt to fire the gun in the air and scare the creature. No reason to harm it. But what I saw made me think twice. I walked out onto my large back porch, fired in the air. The loud noise pierced my eardrums and chased me to flinch. The seacow the rifle fired. A dull reddish blur appeared, sprinting into the neighbor's pig pen. It got on all fours and grabbed the poor animal with its mouth, then sprinted back into the forest with the swine clutched between its jaws. Holy shit! I yell after seeing this. This is where it gets really bad. I sprint to my neighbor's house, gun in hand, waiting to tell him about the grisly abduction I just witnessed. I stopped about 50 feet from the house when I noticed the glass slider door was ajar, and a thick path of blood led from there to the barn. I didn't notice this before, because you can't see either the house or the barn from my house. It's covered in trees. The pig and cattle pens are right near the woods on their backyard, but the tree grove stops, so you can see them. Scared crapless, I tentatively followed the trail. When I reached the inside of the barn, I already knew what I would find. 2 skeletons lie in a haystack. Both were white and picked clean. Yelling bloody murder, I ran back to my house. I locked myself inside with my gun. Pelting rain and hail started coming down. Before the power went out, I watched the news channel, and apparently this storm would go on for 3 days, and it was a big one. Thunder and lightning crashed, and I tried to call the police. News channel blaring in the background. No service. Then the TV cut out. I went to bed and locked every door and window, grabbed my bow as well as my gun and my hunting knife. I finally made it through morning. I'm surprised I slept at all. When I woke up, I noticed something gleaming in the dirt of the pig pen through the pelting rain. A bone-white skeleton, and the other pig was missing. Blood adorned the trees and fence near the pen. I'm typing this on my phone, which is at 20% plus. I have no way to charge it. Does anyone know what this thing is? I need help. I will update tomorrow, hopefully, if I conserve phone battery and I'm not dead by then. 7th story. The Wendigo that didn't leave me alone. I honestly don't know where to start or if I'm ready to be posting this story of mine, but hopefully it'll help. I know you won't believe me, and honestly I won't even blame you guys. It still doesn't make sense in my own head. I've heard stories about unknown creatures in woods, but never thought I'd encounter one myself, you know? I posted another story about some creepy old people that I had encountered in the woods, but that's nothing. This makes a good horror story for people, but it eats me every day. But here we go. I love to go hiking. I go with my 3-year-old German Shepherd and let her go unleashed since we like to go to secluded places. Now I have been hiking all over Utah mountains and wanted a new hike that wasn't too far from me. I have an app that tells me about hikes near me, if it is a hard hike, reviews, and if it's dog-friendly. Now I was scrolling through All Trail looking for possibly something new, but I wasn't too hopeful. But to my delight, there was something new. I don't know why I don't remember the name of it, but I do remember it was at the bottom of the list, and it had one review saying good. I thought that was kind of strange. Mostly because people love to review hikes and try to tell the city what they can do to improve the hike and make it more safe, but I figured it wasn't a popular hike. So the next day Kyrie and I packed up our stuff and went up towards the hike. I always carry first aid kit, extra food, a knife, and just emergency stuff in case I get lost. It's important to mention now that Kyrie eats a raw diet, meaning she eats raw meat not cooked. And since we were going so early in the morning, I thought I could bring some with us. I put it in her blue backpack I make her wear and decided when it was getting warmer we would stop to eat. Where I live, There's a long drive through the canyon and many roads going towards the hike you'd like to go on. This one was a little further than I'm used to, but I didn't care. It was new, and I was excited. So was Kyrie. She cries in the car until we get there. Now I was following the directions on my phone and saw that it had led me towards a thin road that was hidden. No wonder I haven't heard of this place. It was hidden and far up the mountain. The road only fit one car, so the whole time I was so anxious that another car would come down, and how I would handle that, but there never was. I never saw another car. When I got to the parking lot, if I could call it that, I noticed there was only space for like 3 cars, all in a tight space. It was small, so I decided to park my car with the front facing towards the road. I thought maybe it was private property. Checked the app, but it didn't say anything about private property. I shrugged it off, got Kyrie out, prepared us, and saw the trail. Now, even though I knew there wasn't anyone parked there, I kept Kyrie on a leash. I didn't know if there were bikers along the trail, but after 30 minutes or so, I didn't see anyone. I decided to let her off leash. It was a steep hike for the first half, but it was beautiful. We were deep in the woods, and I felt at peace. I used to wear headphones when I hiked, but didn't anymore, so I was enjoying the natural sounds of the forest. It was still early in the morning, so I wore a light jacket and decided when it got warmer I'd give Kyrie her breakfast. Now before you start to hate, I know bringing Kyrie's raw meat was absolutely stupid and ignorant of me. I had never seen a bear or wolf or anything, so I got cocky and just thought it was okay. I learned my lesson the bad day, so no need to tell me I was dumb. But honestly, I wouldn't blame you if you commented that. Now here is where we begin the bad part of this story. The trail finally stopped being steep and sort of an easy hike from here. When you got to the top, you could see through the trees a beautiful open meadow. On the other side of it, you can hear a river and a waterfall. The trail went around the meadow. The meadow was absolutely beautiful with the mountains in the background, the sound of the water. This hike was almost the most beautiful one I had ever been to. When Kyrie and I were sort of in the center of the meadow, she stopped right in front of me and looked towards the meadow. Kyrie always walked ahead of me, and when she stopped, I stopped since I trusted her judgment. Before I could look, the smell hit me first. You know, the typical rotting smell, but oh my God, words cannot explain how bad it stank. It burned my nose and started to make me tear up. I put my shirt over my nose, feeling nauseous, and looked over to where Kyrie was looking. In the middle of the meadow was a deer. Now I've only seen does, but never a male deer in person, but his antlers were huge. Have you ever seen Princess Mononoke? When he sees the deer spirit walking across the water, and how big his antlers were. Almost like that. The beauty of the deer was amazing, but not enough to take away the disgusting smell that was making me sick. The deer was looking towards the mountains and away from me. I thought maybe Kyrie's food was going bad. I checked that and it seemed fine. When I looked up again, the deer was looking towards our direction. I noticed that Kyrie's hackles went up at that. She started to cry nervously. Now I've heard of Wendigos and skinwalkers. I am Native American. It is common for these creatures to be in our childhood stories. That and also listening to scary stories on YouTube. Now when Kyrie did that, I got a bad feeling in my stomach despite the sickness. It was a Wendigo and I knew that. Now I didn't know what to do. These creatures were only a part of my stories to make me go to bed, not to instructions of what to do. Plus my grandmother was the one with the stories and passed away. She was the one with the experience, not my mom or anyone else. I glanced at Kyrie again when she cried and looked back towards the creature. It started to stand on its hind legs. Holy hell, it was fucking tall, and it faced my direction. It started to walk towards me. I was going to run until I heard in my head, I am the one of this land. Suddenly it started to run towards me, full speed. I screamed. called Kyrie, and started to run. Kyrie was following behind me. I started to cry as I was running since I could hear it catch up to me. It was loud. It was destroying everything it came in contact with to get to me. The adrenaline running through me was making me just focus on running. I didn't know where to go, I just ran. The trail suddenly got smaller and bushes with thorns started to appear, but I didn't feel them as they cut my arms. As I heard it got closer, it suddenly went to the left as I ran straight. I somehow had the balls to look back to see it was gone, but also Kyrie. Kyrie? I said, but right as I called out for her, the trail ended with a foot drop onto a patch of rocks. I hit my head, bleeding a bit, but again I couldn't feel it that much and just got up. I looked towards the forest when I suddenly heard a loud cry from my right. It was Kyrie. Kyrie! I cried out. I stood up, crying and lost at what to do. I looked back to see a river leading up to the waterfall I heard. Suddenly a heavy weight ran into me, and we both fell back. I hit my head again on the back and looked up to see Kyrie. Kyrie had blood all over her. It was pouring from her neck. Kyrie? I cried out. She was whimpering and breathing heavy. She still had her backpack on with some cuts in it. Before I had a chance to help her, a scream came from the forest. I looked back at the waterfall and somehow had the strength to pick up my 85-pound dog and carry her. I don't know where I was planning to go. I was just running to the waterfall as if it was a safe place. I was almost there when I heard the creature land on the rocks that I did early. I tripped at that and looked back to see it looking at me. Its eyes were black, or I think so. It could also be that there wasn't anything in there. I don't know. I took off Kyrie's backpack and threw it towards the monster, hoping it would take the meat and just leave us alone. I was scooting back towards the waterfall, crying as I did so, holding and dragging Kyrie with my left arm. I found that being so close to the creature made me literally weak to my knees. It walked over to me, taking huge steps. It looked so different than before. Before it looked like a deer, and now as it crawled over to me it looked like a monster. I don't know how else to describe this awful demon. I don't.
I'm sorry.
But I felt water hit my head hard as I had reached the waterfall. I kept going until I was up against the wall. There barely enough space where water wasn't hitting Kyrie and his faces. Kyrie felt limp at this point. I could somewhat see the creature through the water, but still saw it coming towards me. It stood on its hind legs when it was close enough to me, watching me. The smell was so disgusting. I couldn't help but throw up in my mouth. It reached his arms out to grab me. I screamed so loud. I actually lost my voice. After I let out that scream, another scream came from the deep forest. The creature snapped its head almost completely backward, looking towards the scream. The scream sounded like the one this one had let out earlier. I was still holding onto Kyrie, crying and screaming since its arm was close. It looked back to me, pulling its arm away, and again said in my mind, "I am the one of this land." With that, it took steps back watching me and went down the riverbank. It crawled on all fours, stopping next to Kyrie's backpack. It ripped it apart and pulled out the meat, eating it with the plastic bag that it was in. It suddenly screamed and ran towards that direction of the scream from earlier. When I thought it was gone, I stood up shakily and carried Kyrie towards the trail again. When I was running, I came across my backpack that I had left earlier and stopped. It was ripped apart, so I took off my jacket and wrapped it around Kyrie's neck where she was bleeding a lot. After that, I barely remember. All I remember is carrying Kyrie and driving down, screaming the whole way towards the emergency vet. They asked us what happened, and I told them it was a bear. They called the ambulance since I had blood all over me, and they couldn't tell if it was mine or Kyrie's. Kyrie made it through surgery and had to have some stitches on her, along with a pad. It didn't really heal, and a huge bump grew on there. It had been infected, but eventually got better. She also had a bite mark on the top of her left eye, but that healed much better. They pulled out a 4-inch tooth. I don't have it because I couldn't even look at it, but they declared it from a bear, even though they said it looked weird. While I was waiting for Kyrie, I went to look up the trail on the app, and it was gone. Why or how, but it is. I don't remember where it is either. That's all a blur. I have some pictures up of Kyrie. The one with my niece is a hike my mom took her on with my niece. It had been weeks after, and my mom thought to try and help her through it. Kyrie looks nervous in the picture, but you can see the huge bump on the left side of her neck. There's also a picture with Kyrie and her bandages around her neck. And the one that is the most recent of her neck, it's black. The stitches came out. The last picture is of the top of her head, also black, but it's healed now. I'll have pictures of these, but don't know where or how to post these. I haven't been hiking since, and I refuse to let Kyrie go. That time my mom took her, she did it while I was at work, but regretted it because she said Kyrie was crying and was so scared they had to just go home. My mom knows. I screamed at night from nightmares for a week or two. My mom put white candles in my room to get rid of the bad spirits attracted to my negativity. So yeah, here's my story. I've heard stories where people saw a Wendigo and they didn't get harmed. And God, I wish I went through that. I hate hiking. My therapist thinks I may have some PTSD, but only knows of it as a bear. I'm getting through it. Kyrie is too. Hopefully one day I can go back, but I don't see that being for a while. Please, if you're going to go up to the mountains, please prepare. Mother Nature is not only unpredictable, but has things in there that just don't make sense in our heads. So please be safe. I say that with serious sincerity. 8th story. Creepy guy followed me home. Very recently something strange happened to me, and I really don't know what to do about it. Technically nothing is wrong, I guess, except that I am terrified. Any suggestions would be helpful. It started last night when I was at my best friend Amy's house around 11 p.m. I was on her front lawn waiting for her to be ready so we could walk back to my place a few blocks away for a girls' night in. That was when this guy approached me. He was good-looking, early 30s, had messy black hair and a light stubble. I was already freaked out because why would this guy be coming up to me, a young woman, this late at night alone? I immediately took a step back to be closer to Amy's house. Without hesitation, he stepped onto her lawn and came right over to me. "Hi, sorry. I know it's late, but I'm really interested in buying that house over there." He motions across the street where a few houses down there's a "for sale" sign propped on the grass. And I was wondering if you knew whether or not the owner would be up still? I just looked at him for a moment wondering whether or not to believe him. The entire situation just seemed wrong to me. This is the kind of thing you hear about on the news, and it never ends well. Eventually, I came back to my senses, and in my bravest voice responded, It's 11 p.m. I really don't think they want some stranger knocking on their door right now. Call the realtor in the morning, the number's on the sign," I said, pointing to the big red numbers at the bottom. He just stared at me after that. He stood there long enough for me to seriously contemplate just running and banging on Amy's door. I brushed the thought aside. I was safe. I was only 20 or so feet from my best friend's house with her family I had known since preschool, eating dinner inside. For all I knew, her mom was watching us right now, ready to come to the rescue should it be necessary. "Anything else?" I half yelled at the man. This seemed to snap him out of it. "Sorry, you're right. That makes a lot more sense," he said with a slight grin. Not sure what I was thinking. "See you later." He turned and half jogged back toward the house and presumably towards his car. But as he rounded the small bend on Amy's block, I grew nervous. I hadn't seen him get into a car. Was he parked all the way down the block? Just then my friend stepped out of her house and locked the door behind her. As she was shoving her keys into her purse, I ran over to her. "You just missed the weirdest thing ever. I am so creeped out right now." I proceeded to tell her everything that had happened as we walked toward my house. What a creep. That is so freaky. I wonder if he's actually a murderer," she said, followed by a mock scary laugh. We joked around about it a little more, finding comparisons between the man and our favorite serial killers. We laughed the whole walk back at the strangeness of the situation, feeling safer in each other's company. It felt good to laugh about it, but for some reason we still kept our voices low, hoping he had really left. By the time we got back to my house, my other friends were already settled in and had started drinking. We were greeted with a, "What the fuck took you so long? We were starting to think you'd been murdered," from my sister, and "Did you bring more wine?" from a few of the others. In total, this sleepover was comprised of 4 girls in their early 20s. Myself, Amy, my little sister, and my college roommate. To answer my sister's question, Amy and I began telling them the story of what had just occurred. They were all reasonably freaked out. "Do you think he left? I hope he didn't follow you guys." Christy, my college roommate, responded. Amy and I looked at each other, knowing that we both had those same thoughts on the short walk home. I picked up my glass of wine off the table before I replied. "I mean, who knows? He was probably just some weirdo and didn't actually realize how late it was, and then when he figured out how creepy he was being, he just bolted," I said, taking a long sip from my glass. There were a few nods of agreement, but mostly just bewildered looks. I took this time to look over my shoulder and make sure the front door was locked. A few hours and bottles of wine later, we had completely forgotten the incident and were happily watching Mean Girls for the billionth time. It was very late into the night by this point, probably around 2 a.m., when the doorbell rang. My blood instantly went cold and the buzz from the alcohol left me. My friends and I all whipped our heads around to look at the front door. The porch light had a motion sensor, and we could see the bright light just outside, but we also have privacy glass indoors, so all we could make out was the shape of a man, just standing there. From the size and clarity of his dark figure, it appeared that he was right against the door, his arm extended to ring the bell again. Someone found the remote to mute one of Janice Ian's rants, and my sister leaned over the couch to turn the lights off. We felt safer hidden in the dark. He just stood there, though, not moving. He didn't ring the bell again. He just stood there. Should I call the cops? I whispered to my friends, who all stared at me with tears in their eyes. No one responded. We were all terrified, but in the back of my mind, I kept hoping that this was all just some kind of prank, a weird coincidence that had nothing to do with the man from before. I slowly got up and went to the room next to the front door. As quietly as I could, I moved the blinds away from the window and attempted to see who was at the door. I could barely make out his shape when the porch light went out. The sudden plunge into darkness startled me, and I jumped, just a little, but it was enough to rustle the blinds, which hit loudly against one another. When I looked back up, it was into the face of the man I had seen earlier. He had this eerie grin plastered on his face as he looked at me through the swinging blinds. He reached his hand up and tapped the window 3 times with his index finger. I'm not sure whether what I did next was brave or stupid, but I reached out and slammed my palm hard against the glass. He had his face only inches away on the other side where I smacked. His smile grew, but I figured I'd scared him off because he turned and ran. Now, I'm not sure if that was the wine thinking for me, but I was very proud that I had scared him off. I was our fearless protector, all 5 feet of me. When I went back into the room with my friends, they were all huddled on the ground, cell phones out, ready to dial whatever number we needed. "Is he gone?" my sister asked. Before I could respond, Amy chimed in. "What does he want? He knows where I live too. I don't know what he wants, probably just to scare us, okay? I'm sure this is nothing. Now, no one really believed me. In our group, I was the one who went in first to the haunted houses, who spent my nights watching Charles Manson documentaries, and obviously spent a lot of time reading scary stories online. Anyway, the cops probably can't do anything about it. He's not trying to break in. He's just being creepy. I'm gonna go make sure he's gone. In my house, the upstairs window is directly above the front door, so you can't see if anyone is at the door from there, but you can see the rest of the street better, so I headed there. Here the blinds were already drawn, so I just peeked out, trying to stay silent and hidden in the dark. Parked across the street, there was this beat-up tan car I had never seen before. I tried to focus on it, but I really wish I hadn't. Inside was the man, in the driver's seat with his arms neatly folded over the open window, staring directly at me. What freaked me out most about this was how content he looked sitting there in the dark. It was such an unsettling image. A man sitting with his body twisted at whatever strange angles allow oneself to sit with their arms like that. He looked like he was getting ready to hear a great story, and I was going to tell it to him. He just sat there staring with a slight smile on his face. I tore my eyes away and ran downstairs to tell my friends what was going on. I sat on the couch with them and we discussed what we should do next. We decided to wait and see what he would do next. We sat in silence for a few hours, but nothing happened and we all relaxed a little. At this point, we figured it had to just be a prank. Just after 3 a.m., we started to drift off, and eventually the blankets and sleeping bags were pulled out, the incident nearly forgotten. I was woken up at around 6 a.m., just as the sun was coming up, by Christy, who was shaking me. Hey, he's out there again," she whispered to me. My heart immediately began pumping fast, and I looked around to see that everyone was awake now. I looked toward the front door and saw the shape of a man standing just beyond. I cursed under my breath and tiptoed into the adjacent room as I had done before. This time when I saw him, though, he was facing away from the door. What was he looking at? What could his motivation possibly be now? I decided enough was enough. With another jolt of bravery, I stormed over to the door, intent to rip it open and give this guy a piece of my mind. Stupid, I know. But it was now daylight, and there were 4 of us, each armed with cell phones ready to dial 911 any second. Just as I reached for the doorknob, he stepped away. I saw his shape disappear and I opened the door in time to see him get into the tan car across the street. I watched him, now more confused than scared, as he closed the car door behind him. With his door shut, he started the car and 2 other men popped up in the back seat. They just sat up as if they had been there this whole time, pretzeled in his back seat, waiting. The men in the back stared straight ahead. The man in the front said nothing to them, and they said nothing to him. I began to wonder if he even knew they were there. Terrified, I was about to slam the door again when he looked right at me. He began to drive away, but smiled that eerie grin one more time as he waved excitedly at me and shouted, "We'll see you later." 9th story, your friendly neighborhood Wendigo. Before I begin, I'm a 16-year-old male. About 3 years ago, I was in Virginia visiting family over summer. We were right outside the D.C. area and staying in a 2-story house near the freeway. On the other side of the freeway was a forest. So my mom, her boyfriend Eric, and I were all staying with Eric's parents. We had brought some night vision binoculars and decided that tonight was the perfect time to use them. So, after dinner, we gear up and head out. We pass under the freeway and head into the woods. When we get about 5 minutes into the forest, we set down our bag and take out our binocs. My mom looks around with them for a while, seeing a few squirrels here and there. She gets tired of them and passes them to me. I look around for a while, being careful not to look at the freeway for fear of being blinded. I spot something behind a tree about 50 feet to our left. I concentrate on it, trying to figure out what it is. It looks like a pale, bald anorexic man looking straight at us from behind the tree. I get a bit uneasy, but I'm hesitant to believe it's really there. I ask Eric to take a look, just in case. To my despair, he sees it too. He describes it much the same way I did. Now, Eric is a former amateur boxer and I train MMA almost every day, but neither one of us wants to stick around with that thing. We start heading back to the house, crossing under the freeway. We take another look behind us as a car comes by. All three of us see glowing eyes lit up by the headlights on the other side of the freeway. We say fuck that and head back to the house. When we get back, Eric's parents are asleep and my mom and Eric go upstairs to the guest room. There's only one guest room, so I have the couch downstairs. I'm a little too excited after seeing the thing in the woods, so I end up staying up all night. Around 3 a.m., I'm watching TV and start hearing footsteps above me. I immediately remember our earlier encounter and panic a little. I try to calm down and tell myself it's just one of the dogs, or maybe someone who couldn't sleep. I keep hearing the footsteps for a while, until I hear a doorknob jiggle. I find it weird that they're trying to open a locked door, but try to ignore it. They stop, walk around for a few more minutes, and then it's quiet again. I stay up until the sun starts coming up and then pass out. My mom wakes me up and I remember the footsteps from the night before. I describe what happened and ask if one of them got up at any time. She says no, and I think it must have been one of the dogs. That is, until she tells me the room above me is the office. No one was in the office and the door stays locked at night. My heart sinks as I piece it all together. I don't know if it was that thing for sure, but I think it was. I've done a lot of research since then, trying to figure out what that thing was that night. I found two creatures that seemed to match it. I think it was either a skinwalker or Wendigo. Whichever one it was, I'm just thankful that door was locked. I know I wouldn't be able to fight that thing no matter how tough I am. 10th story. There is something unexplainable in the forests of Oklahoma. The United States is, no doubt, a diverse land of many different forms of life. From the fierce grizzly bears in the mountains of Alaska to the stealthy alligators in the swamps of Florida. Wherever you may be, there is always something unique about your state. That is until you get to Oklahoma. You see, Oklahoma is without a doubt one of the most boring places, maybe ever. Having lived here for 18 years, I'll be the first person to tell you that. Sure, there are large cities, just like any other civilization. However, they are spread out over tens, even hundreds of miles apart. What you are left with in between those cities is what some refer to as the sticks, or the boondocks, or the country, whatever you choose to call it. And that is where I'm from. In the sticks, it consists of four main elements: lots of trees, lots of crops, lots of wildlife, and the occasional Walmart or Dollar General. Since there is not a lot to do out here, that is where most Oklahoma residents take up the pastime of hunting, and that is where my story begins. It was a cold November night, right in the heart of deer season. I was laying in bed enjoying a video game I was playing when there was a knock on my bedroom door. It opened, and my dad walked in. "Hey kid," he said. "Yes, Dad." "You haven't been hunting this season yet. Why don't you take my bow and I'll get you set up, and in the morning you can head out there and go kill us something." Wow, he's really putting me on the spot here. I thought to myself, yeah, sure, why not? I said to him. He told me to dress warm and to meet him outside by the front door in 10 minutes so we could walk out to the spot, so I would know where to go when it was time to leave tomorrow. We began our walk into the woods. With every step we took, I began to get a little bit more annoyed. Where are we going? I thought we were just gonna go behind the house, I didn't know we were gonna have to hike to the hunting spot. Damn, what was I thinking? I should have just said no. When we finally arrived at the hunting spot, we were more than a mile out into the wilderness behind my house. He finally stopped by a huge oak tree and pointed his flashlight at some cedar trees that were off to the side. "Do you see it?" he said.
No.
I replied. He walked closer and shined his flashlight into the trees to reveal a tiny chair that was hidden under some tree branches and sticks. "That is where you're gonna set up in the morning. Got that?" I nodded my head as he tossed out some dried corn to attract the deer in the morning when I came back. "What time do I need to head out here?" I asked my dad, expecting him to say 6 to 7 a.m. He then muttered, "You need to be up and ready to head out by 4 a.m. My heart sank. It was going to be pitch black outside. There's no way I was going to be able to make it all the way out here in the pitch black. We finally made it back to the house by 11:30 and I headed up to my room to get as much sleep as possible before this hunting trip. I awoke to the painful sound of my alarm blaring into my dark room. I looked at my phone and it was 3:40 a.m. I sighed and sat up. I put on the warmest clothes I could find and made my way out into the living room. There on the couch sat my dad's bow, 2 arrows, and a small but sharp hunting knife. I grabbed the gear plus a flashlight and made my way out the front door. Navigating the woods at night was an extremely frightening experience that took much longer than what I would have wished. I left my house at 4 a.m. and I did not arrive at the hunting location until 4:37. I was impressed with just how many trees I managed to walk into and how many times I almost tripped over large logs, even with the help of my flashlight. Once I arrived, I sat down in the little uncomfortable plastic chair and began waiting. My dad wanted me out here so early because it makes it a lot easier for the hunter to sneak into his spot and the deer not being able to watch him. I'll never forget the paranoia I experienced in those woods, in the pitch black. The feeling of not wanting to breathe too loud because something or someone might hear you is like no other. After roughly 15 minutes of sitting in the quiet darkness, I heard it. Sticks snapping and leaves crunching. It was a deer walking to my spot. My heart began to pound as I listened closer. The leaves continued to crunch with each footstep, but that's when I picked up on something strange. Is this thing walking on 2 legs? I thought to myself. It sounded just like a pair of human legs walking through the leaves. Is it my dad? I thought. Maybe I forgot something at the house. Surely it has to be him. But no, it couldn't have been him. The footsteps were coming from the woods, not the trail we walked. The footsteps emerged from the woods and stopped. After a short pause, it took 1 step towards me. A moment later, it took 1 more step in my direction. I began to get nervous. Deer shouldn't be acting this way. What the hell is this thing? I raised my flashlight up from my lap, and in a moment of pure bravery and stupidity, I clicked my flashlight on. What I saw in front of me still haunts me to this very day. In front of me stood a creature no shorter than 10 feet tall. It stood on 2 legs. It was covered in black fur. The face was human, I believe. The face looked to be of a man's face. The eyes were closed and the mouth was contorted into a sinister grin. It had 2 great big antlers that seemed to come off of an elk or a moose. It had hooves for feet, and its arms were long and skinny, but had what appeared to be claws on the end of its hands. As soon as I saw this thing, I clicked off my flashlight, praying it didn't see me. Too late. I almost started gagging from fear when I heard this thing sprinting at me. As fast as I could, I loaded an arrow and drew back the bow. Without hesitation, I fired the bow into the darkness, hoping I could hit the creature, but I missed. I heard the arrow whistle off into the woods before striking a tree. Shit. Stupid idea, I thought. I immediately stood up and began sprinting down the trail. The creature was in close pursuit. I ran faster than I knew I could down this trail. When I was almost halfway home, I began to naturally run slower because of fatigue, and that's when it swiped at me. It hit me directly in my right calf. I stumbled and fell off the trail and into a nearby ditch. Once I fell in, I could immediately feel the warm blood begin to start gushing out of my leg. I quickly tore off my hoodie and wrapped it around my leg as a temporary tourniquet. However, my bleeding leg was the least of my worries. The creature jumped down into the ditch with great force and began swiping at the ground, hoping to hit me. Luckily, the thing landed about 20 feet away from me, so I had some time to spare. I hurriedly pulled out my flashlight and threw it behind the creature. Upon hearing the flashlight hit the leaves, it turned around and began swiping at the ground once again. As quickly and quietly as possible, I crawled out of the ditch. On my way out, I heard the creature begin to make a clicking noise from its mouth. Now, I can't confirm it, but I assumed that noise was the creature using echolocation to find me. If this thing is blind, how did it see my flashlight back at the hunting spot? I thought. Then I realized I had to click my flashlight on, and the creature probably heard that. Despite now knowing it was using audio to track me, I still ran to the best of my ability out of the woods. The thing didn't follow me out. I made it home and crashed through my front door, bleeding all over the place. My parents took me to the ER to get stitched up. They asked me what happened, and I told them what happened, but of course they didn't believe me. They assumed I fell while walking through the woods and tore open my leg somehow. And after a while, I began to think the same thing. Maybe I was sleepwalking and fell. Maybe I was hallucinating, who knows? Is what I used to tell myself. I almost forgot about my experience until today. My dad went out hunting and was supposed to be back 3 hours ago. Me and my mother began to get worried. I walked out my front door. I planned on going to look for my dad, and that's when I heard it. Screaming. I don't know if it was my dad's or if it was just a wild animal, but we called the police anyway. And as I typed this, I can hear a faint clicking out by the woods, and if I look hard enough, I think I can make out a human face looking up at my window. Please, if you are ever in the forests of Oklahoma, be extra quiet. You never know who or what is going to hear you.